Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Goucher, and welcome again to Eckstein Hall, Marquette University Law School. We're glad to have you here. This is On the Issues. This is our continuing series of conversations with news and policymakers, people we like to say are doing interesting and important work in this region and beyond. Today, we're going to be talking about education, urban education specifically, and we are joined by the Superintendent of St. Marcus Lutheran School. Won't you please welcome Henry Tyson. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to begin with a personal note because Henry Tyson's story is an interesting one, as you'll, I think, be able to hear. For those of you who don't know Superintendent Tyson, he is a native of Great Britain. And I want to begin there. You were born there. You spent some time here and then went back there and then returned here for college. Tell us a little bit about how you ended up in Milwaukee, focusing your life's work on urban education.
Well, it's been a long journey. I'm sure glad I'm here. I love this city. Very thankful to be in Milwaukee. I attended college in Chicago and spent the spring break of my senior year doing an urban plunge in the Austin neighborhood on the west side of Chicago. And during that week, I had my first encounter with Central City, USA. And God really used that week to grab me. And when that week ended, I knew with absolute certainty that I would be spending my life working on issues in the Central City. I graduated from college and ended up doing AmeriCorps, the National Service Program with Habitat for Humanity. And in that experience in the West Humboldt neighborhood on the west side of Chicago, I started to realize that the kids in that community and in our homes were not being educated. And I visited some schools and was absolutely stunned by what I saw in the schools in West Humboldt Park. At the time, Paul Vallis and Arnie Duncan were doing school reform in Chicago, and I found my life's work, which was to get involved in urban ed. I got a master's of secondary education from DePaul, taught for a year in the Chicago public schools, and then in the Niles Township High School District for 2 years, and then had the opportunity to come to St. Marcus and be the assistant principal, and that was back in 2002.
Who recruited you? Was it Cole Knippel who recruited you to come up to St. Marcus?
Cole and the congregation at St. Marcus.
Okay. So you arrived at St. Marcus. What were the goals when you got there? What were you trying to do?
Well, Cole, who had been teaching with me at Niles, is a real visionary. And his vision was simple. He wanted to create the best urban Christian school in America. And when I was thinking about moving to Milwaukee, I said no several times, and then really felt that God was calling me to Milwaukee and that there was an opportunity in Milwaukee to do something really different and very significant. And so I joined his team. At the time, we had just about 100 children in the school. It was in a building about 100 years old. And the goal was to make it the absolute premier urban Christian school.
Well, let's talk about St. Marcus today. You've got, what, about 750 students? You're at North and Palmer. Correct. I'm trying to recall off the top of my head. North and Palmer. Tell us who those students are. Let's begin there.
We are 90% low-income African-American, about 4% Hispanic, and the remainder Caucasian.
And it's a voucher school, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Tell us about the school day. How long are the school days? Do you have summer school? Give us an idea of what the day is.
Yeah, ultimately, the job that we have to do at St. Marcus is move students from relatively low functioning to high functioning. So last school year, we brought in, because we were expanding 6th grade, we brought in 56 students between 3rd grade and 8th grade. And of those students, the 56, in fact, who had taken the WKCE at their previous school, and only 3 of them had scored proficient or advanced on the WKCE at their previous school. And they come from voucher schools and from charter schools and from public schools. And so the question is, how do you move a relatively lower performing, lower functioning population of students so that by the time they graduate at 8th grade, they are ready and equipped to be successful in high school? And so we've tried to build a structure that will make sure that every child is successful. So on a more practical level, that means we start early. We start at 8. The middle school doesn't finish class until 4:20 in the afternoon. If a student is on academic recovery, which means they have below a 2.0 GPA, or they've missed a certain number of homework assignments, they're required to stay in class until 5 o'clock. They're also required to attend Saturday school, which runs from 9 to 12 on Saturday mornings. In addition to that, we do a 4-week summer school program. And the school day is rigorous. If you have had a chance to visit, or if you do visit, and you're all welcome, but not at the same time, you will see this rigor and this intensity about the school day. So longer school days is critical. Time on task is of fundamental importance. And then an environment that is rigorous. And then I'd maybe back up a little bit, too, and say perhaps of greater importance even than that are a couple of our philosophies. Our first philosophy is we're mission-driven. And we're very open about our mission. It is to help children understand that they are redeemed children of God who are saved by grace. That's our fundamental message. So what we do at the very beginning of the year, in fact, this very week, our theme is, who am I? And the answer to that question that the students learn is that they are redeemed children of God. And what does that do for children? We oftentimes have broken children coming in, students who have failed in other settings, and they begin to understand that they have value. And so of fundamental importance before you teach the reading or the math or the history or the science is helping children understand you have inherent value. Similarly, with that same concept, you begin to learn that because I have value, you also have value. And therefore, we get a context where we see students going from being defensive, from being angry, from lashing out at people, to beginning to treat one another with love and respect. So that's one critical philosophy. And the other one is simply a philosophy of no excuses, which is stolen from the KIPP schools, the Knowledge is Power program. And it's real simple. There's no excuse for failure. We will make sure that every child succeeds no matter what. So the final piece of the school day is...
Define success for me.
Live up to and beyond their potential. And for us, what that means is that by the time you graduate from 8th grade, you are ready and prepared for success in high school. Now, we have about 50 students who have IEPs. They're designated special needs students. You know, and for some of the more extreme students with special needs, success isn't necessarily the same as it is for everybody else. But when they walk across the stage and they get the diploma, you have to know that the child has been successful to the greatest extent of their ability. And for the vast majority of our students, we measure that by 4 years later, did they graduate from a traditional high school model in 4 years? But, you know, we have, frankly, about 10% who come into our middle school, maybe 8%, who you give them their homework at the end of the day and they go home, and every day they fail. What do you do with those children who go home every day and they fail? Well, the answer that we've come up with is, you know, why do they fail, first of all? They fail either because they're so far behind academically they can't do the work, or they fail because when they go home, their home, for one reason or another, is just not conducive to success. And the reality is that our whole city is losing this bottom 10%. The ones from the most broken, difficult homes. Well, we won't accept that. So our solution is we're going to keep them till 8:30 at night. So those students get fed a free dinner. And then we have high school tutors and other alumni who come back and work with them. And by the time they walk out at 8:30 at night from our college prep center, ideally they leave their backpack, they walk in the next day, and they're ready. And they start to taste success. So it's sort of an unrelenting, whatever we need to do for every child, we will do to make sure they're successful.
You're talking about putting those students in a safe, structured, but supportive environment. That's the best place for them to be for the majority of the time they're awake.
Correct.
Yeah. Uniforms. You have uniforms at the school.
We do.
Why?
Because I'm British. I went to a British boarding school. Not only do we have ties, but we had like 50 different ties. So we actually now have 4 different ties, boys and girls in good standing, and then honor roll ties and high honor roll ties. I'm thrilled that a good number of our special needs students are on honor roll. They have curriculums designated for them, and they can succeed within that context. But we use the uniform as a symbol of professionalism. You know, we dressed up today because we're professionals. Students should too. It's their job.
Help us better understand the metrics, and this is always the bottom line question. How do your students perform? How are they doing with other students who come from similar circumstances? Give us some insight into that.
Well, as the educational community well knows, the benchmarks with standardized testing have grown complicated over the last few years. Very, very hard to use standardized testing at this point in time as an accurate and adequate measure of student achievement. Now, we do know that we see dramatic growth with our students using the same benchmark over various years. We also know that we dramatically exceed the performance of the city as a whole when it comes to those standardized tests. We support standardized testing, but we would recognize that they are a flawed measure. And so ultimately, we put our stock in our alumni. So we track every single graduate for 8 years after they graduate, and we've learned a couple of things. We know that 91% of the students who graduate and go on to high school, 91% graduate from high school through a traditional model in 4 years. About another 6% get a GED or go through some other alternative high school program. So the students are doing phenomenally well in high school, and that to us is the most critical measure of how well we're doing. Secondly, we're looking at college at this point because we're relatively young in this process still. We're looking at that percent that enter a 4-year college. And yet, even in saying that, I want to be clear that we absolutely celebrate students who choose a 2-year program like MATC. There are some phenomenal programs there, and our city needs students who are trained in that way. But what we know is that the class that graduated from us in 2005, only 3, or about 15%, entered a 4-year college. That's frankly because academically speaking, we just weren't as good as we needed to be. The next year, the class of 2006, it jumped to 13, or about 50%, entered a 4-year college. And then it went up to 18, or about 76%. So what we noticed is with the same group, the same demographic, as we changed what we did, the students did better, which shouldn't be very surprising. But it sometimes is, sadly.
So you want to expand now. That's where you are in this process. They have 750 students at St. Marcus. You're saying you could add another 900 students if you had a school.
Correct.
School building. And this brings us into sort of what's been in the news lately. You've been in the news lately. You have your eyes on a building that has been vacant. It's Milwaukee Public Schools building, Malcolm X. It's only a couple of blocks from your other school, isn't it? I think it's at...
4 blocks.
4 blocks, yeah. It's at Center and First Street, or around First and Center. Why do you feel that... The MPS has said, look, we already have plans for this building. In the last year, we've been talking about having a community resource center. So the building's not available. And yet you keep saying, I want that building. Why do you keep pursuing that if they say it's not available?
Because I fundamentally and deeply believe it is an unacceptable answer. I think that they have some good reasons for telling us no, but the reason that they're giving us is a false reason. And so let me just back up a little bit. And first, seeing as the public schools have been mentioned, let me be really clear on this. I and we as an institution absolutely support the Milwaukee Public Schools and believe deeply that we will not solve the educational crisis in our city until we have a functional public school system. And so whatever I can do and we can do to help and support, we're all in, because our community needs a strong public schools. So we're supporters of strong public education. But let's back up. So first of all, this building has been vacant for 6 years. I actually live 3 blocks away, right in between the 2 buildings. And the building has been a problem in the Harambe community now for 5 years. So we were looking for a new campus, and I met with Superintendent Thornton. He visited on January 30th and explained what we needed to do, and the superintendent was supportive. He loved the school. He said, I love what you're doing. I'd like to help you get one of these buildings. And the building that was most available, there are 3 vacant MPS buildings in our community within 9 blocks, was Malcolm X, because The other buildings were designated in some way or inappropriate for what we were looking for. And the superintendent told me that the building, they had no current or future plans for the building. Those were his words. He said to me, our plan for Malcolm X would be for flex space. Flex space is when you shut down a building to fix it up and then you move the students temporarily. He said, Henry, Malcolm X is 1,000 kids. It's way too big for flex space. We're not going to use it for that purpose. So he encouraged me to write a letter. So I wrote a letter to his office and said we'd like to purchase the building. And about 6 weeks later, we got word just simply said, you can't purchase the building. And so then we put together a plan for it because we thought that was an unacceptable answer for the children of Milwaukee who are lining up at our doors, who are desperate for high-quality education. I mean, I turn away personally hundreds of children all summer long. And I know that in February and March, these children have other options. But by May, June, July, and August, they are getting enrolled in pitiful schools. Voucher schools, some charter schools, and some public schools. Nobody has a monopoly on pitiful schools. We all have them, right? And frankly, we all have great schools, okay? So for the district to be telling me in January that we have no plan for this building, and for it to be evident that there is no plan for that building, and for that building to continue to sit vacant, and then for the plan to be a community center for which there has been no funding or no concrete plan laid out, I think is profoundly unacceptable. So my battle is not with MPS. I'm fighting for the children in our community and the parents in our community who are fighting for one really, really simple, basic right in America: access to decent, high-quality education. And I have no other beef with anybody. But that building needs to be occupied and used as a school, and we can fill it with 1,000 kids, and we're willing to do that.
Is it possible that Superintendent Thornton didn't know of plans by board members for that building? Do you think that's possible?
I would certainly hope not. I mean, like, they had plenty of time to think about it, and when they wrote the letter of denial that was in about March, perhaps a reason. Mr. Tyson, you can't buy that building because we have other plans for it. So there was no other plans mentioned since our request until we rolled out our vision for Malcolm X.
Why would a building like Garfield, another vacant school building, which I think has a capacity of about 450 or something like that,
correct?
Why wouldn't that be acceptable? Since you're beginning a new school, do you think you could fill 900 seats right off the bat or have it fully occupied?
We would phase it. I mean, we would start from about
so why would 450 not be acceptable to you?
For a couple of reasons. One, if you go to the City of Milwaukee website and look up Bronzeville, they have had a concrete, published, intelligent plan for Garfield that we support and that Alderwoman Coggs and others still stand by. The Garfield School is going to be a cultural center for Bronzeville, and we think it's in Bronzeville. It's a great idea. We're behind it completely. So we know that, in fact, Garfield is not available. It's been transferred from MPS to the city, and the city says we have a use for it. Lee is even further west. It's on the other side of the expressway on 9th and Meineke. And we have a few issues with Lee. First of all, it's only 44% the size of Malcolm X. It's a small building. It's also not handicapped accessible. And frankly, I've been in it. And anybody who I've known who has been in it, including other school operators, have told us that is not anymore a functional school building. So, again, though, it comes back to what is the most practical, intelligent, immediate use for Malcolm X. And pretty much anybody who's close to this issue, even if they're talking in private, absolutely recognizes that the real issue, what I believe to be the real issue for why MPS is saying no to us using Malcolm X, is not that they want to use it as a community center, it's a question of market share. And I actually think MPS's
because there are dollars attached to the numbers of students in a school. And,
absolutely.
And you think that, they see we're going to lose, we have the potential to lose students to St. Marcus, another St. Marcus school.
Yeah, and Superintendent Thornton is on the record for saying MPS has to protect market share. I actually understand that and understand that as a rationale, in which case I think they should come out and say St. Marcus shouldn't use Malcolm X because we need to protect market share. And then ultimately, when you listen to that argument about protecting market share, when we're talking about children and families who want access now to high-quality education, one has to wonder if market share is really a good reason for saying no to one of the highest performing schools in the city that can fill a vacant building right away.
I want to ask you about something that's in the public domain right now. Bob Peterson, who's the president of the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, the teachers union, writes a blog, and in his most recent post, he asked the question, should public taxpayers pay for discrimination? Why MPS should not sell Malcolm X to St. Marcus. He details core beliefs of the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod. He lists them here. Attitudes towards homosexuality, it's a sin. Women are not to hold positions of authority over men. The theory of evolution is wrong. The papacy of the Roman Catholic Church is the Antichrist. He asks this question, and I'll have you address this. He says, the pastors of the St. Marcus Church should be free to promote their religious views, but public policy is governed by principles of democracy. Should the taxpayers of Wisconsin be expected to fund the Well's homophobic, anti-woman beliefs and its teaching of pseudoscience, such as creationism? I want to give you a chance. It's out there in the public. It's on his blog.
Thanks, Mike.
Well,
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you. No, I appreciate it. Here's my response. Okay, so I will answer the question, but I'm going to get there circuitously. This is an issue that came up here in April, and somehow I missed it. So I'm sitting at my desk yesterday, and I get a little blip from the BBC, you know, the British Broadcasting Corporation. It's still my news source, believe it or not. It has the word Wisconsin in it, and this is out of London. And I think, well, that's interesting. It has Wisconsin in it. It says this: why does Wisconsin send so many black people to jail? Have you guys heard about this?
Yeah,
it came out a while ago. Okay,
yeah.
So the national average for black men incarceration in the U.S. is 6.7%, but in Wisconsin it's 12.8%, almost double the national rate, and 3 percentage points higher than the next state, which is Oklahoma, at like 9%. Okay, so I'm reading this and I'm looking at that, and here's what I recognize is going on. This article on black incarceration is ultimately an education issue. That our state has failed to educate its African American population. And so they end up dead, in jail, or unemployable. And it's because our school system, public, voucher, and charter, has failed. So we have a raging fire over here, raging fire, and there's a little fire truck pulling up, and I'm going to call it St. Marcus, and there are other fire trucks pulling up, Milwaukee College Prep, and Bruce Guadalupe, and Golden Meir, right? And then Bob Peterson says, well, wait a minute, what about that little problem over there? What this is a desperate distraction from the real issue. And you know what? I'll tell you what my passion is. My passion is absolutely Jesus first. But secondly, it's delivering high quality education to kids in the central city who for generations have been denied access to decent schooling. And so if Bob wants an answer to those questions, I'm going to encourage him to talk to the pastors. What I'm here to focus on and what I'm all about and what he should be all about is not worrying about whatever the Wisconsin Synod is doing. The real answer to his question is the state Supreme Court and the federal Supreme Court have both said vouchers are okay. And it's okay for religious schools and non-religious schools of all different types to use vouchers. So really what you've got going on here is an organization that's pretty desperate to distract from the real issue. The real issue is today, not next year or the year after, but today, we have got to get more children living in poverty into high-performing schools. That's what I'm all about.
Let me ask you then the next logical question, and that is that how optimistic are you that as one of the goals that's been set has stated. How optimistic are you that we're going to have 20,000 students in high-performing schools by the year 2020? At one time, you were very optimistic. Are you still optimistic?
My optimism has moved beyond that. Like, I think not only, I'm absolutely convinced we're going to do that because of what I'm seeing in all three sectors and what I see going on in our city. And frankly, as discouraging as some of this conversation is, I remain wildly optimistic. I absolutely believe that within the next maybe 15, 20 years, this city is going to have one of the best urban education systems in the nation. And there's a ton of reasons for my optimism. A, we're a small city. Like, we're manageable. We've only got 125,000 kids. Like, that's a fraction compared to places like LA, New York, and Chicago. We're in the Midwest. I think we bring a great work ethic, a great charitable ethic. The interest in the suburbs about what's going on in the central city is phenomenal. I think that's a huge advantage. And then our city is actually on the move. The 20,000 is a part of the Schools That Can Milwaukee initiative. And they are working very effectively right now in the voucher sector, in the charter sector, and in the district sector. In fact, about 11 of the 35 schools that they're working with are in the district. And their model of using their three pathways, expanding and replicating great schools like Bruce Guadalupe and Milwaukee College Prep and Atonement, and then helping the moderately good schools but with really strong leaders get to a very high level. And then thirdly, recruiting charter management organizations from around the nation, I believe is absolutely going to get us there. Not to mention the work of Teach for America that is now here, City Year that is doing phenomenal work. One that is way below the radar right now but is about to burst onto the scene is the Center for Urban Teaching, which grew out of Wisconsin Lutheran College but is now independent. The work that they are doing in raising up big cohorts of students graduating out of college who are ready and prepared to teach in the urban setting, I think, like TFA, is going to be a game changer for our city. Really creative work happening even in district schools. So at Carver Academy, 2 blocks away from St. Marcus, a school that has struggled forever. You've got a new dynamic principal. TFA is in that building. Schools That Can Milwaukee is in that building. The Center for Urban Teaching has folks in that building. City Year is in that building. I see from the grassroots level, school by school, an incredible dynamism. And one of the most exciting parts about that is that when the principals and school leaders from Schools That Can get together, you have a room with about 50 school leaders, their charter, their voucher, their district, and it's all love. It's just a beautiful thing. It's like we care about each other, we want to help each other, we want to promote each other. And if we can continue to stay that course, I'm convinced we'll hit 20,000 by 2020 and go beyond it, and that it will create a tipping point where we'll begin to see broader change throughout the systems.
I want to explore this further because that is very optimistic, and I'll have you respond to a couple things that might temper that optimism. As somebody who covers politics, I would say that at no time in recent history is the debate between vouchers and public schools more intense than it is today. It's that way in the state legislature. The expansion of the voucher program statewide, I think, will become a big election year issue in 2014. And so my question is, you believe that we're going to be able to overcome this intense polarization on the subject of education. You talked about a room full of people who are supportive of each other. You believe those silos can be overcome, the fact that there are these lingering hard feelings and just fundamental disagreements on the future of education?
I would actually respectfully disagree with your analysis. I think they are already being overcome. I'm hearing from politicians who used to be outright ready to kill vouchers saying, okay, they're here to stay. And the dialogue is shifting to accountability, right, which we've always talked about accountability, and that's a hot topic too.
I'll ask you a question about that, but go ahead.
Sorry, I won't answer now.
Yeah.
Well, I support accountability. I think accountability is critical. But I also think that those folks that are in the room with Schools That Can Milwaukee, public, voucher, charter, the whole bit, I mean, these are the future leaders. I believe the younger generation of educators, as well as a whole chunk of the general public, is ready we're all ready to put the weapons down and start saying, how do we work together? What do we as a voucher system need to do to win some trust from the public sector? You know, critically, you've got to get the conversation away from market share. Because if the conversation is about market share, we cannot have a cooperative citywide environment. But I believe that can happen too, but the market share conversation has to go away.
Let me jump in here. You have a bill that the legislature may or may not act on. We'll see what happens. But it's proposed by Senator Luther Olson, who's a Republican. And it's about more accountability in our schools. I think, as he puts it, his words are, if you get a check, in other words, if you get money, taxpayer money, you get a checkup. And so he wants more performance data from voucher schools. There are some who disagree with that and don't agree with the legislation as it's currently proposed. How do you feel about that? Should there be more performance data made available by voucher schools?
Absolutely. But it should be quality, decent performance data that makes sense. And I would say that, I mean, I'm in a room often.
Would it be the same data that you see public schools releasing?
When that data is available and apples to apples. You know, there's a great skepticism, frankly, that this is doable. A great case in point was the recent release of the WKCE scores, which resulted in a big headline that MPS schools beat voucher schools in 4 out of 5 subject areas. The reality is, when that data was released, and I believe this was done intentionally, it released the data for all MPS students. All of them, whatever their income level, including the 19% that are middle or upper income. And with the voucher students, it was only the voucher students who are almost entirely low income. So when St. Marcus's data, for example, was released, it was great data. I don't need to hide it, but it was the 90% who are voucher students and excluded the 10% who are tuition paying. Well, you can't do that. You've got to compare data that's apples to apples. Otherwise, you're adding fuel to the fire of the confusion that's out there about what's going on. So they eventually corrected that and released the right data, by which time it was too late, and frankly, the community had been misled. But there's a lot of talk right now about a statewide report card. I think a statewide report card that is completed by any school that accepts taxpayer money is a really smart idea. Like, that makes a lot of sense. What do you do when you have a school like Marquette University High School that has, 900 kids, but 40 of them are voucher students? Like, you begin to have a problem of comparing apples to apples. So the beauty is that the dialogue has started, and I can tell you that the folks who are leading the voucher side, we're desperate for a couple of things. First of all, we absolutely believe that the very bottom segment of schools, they need to close. I believe that. They need to be closed. They're pitiful. But how do you do that? We need to find a way to do that. But secondly, I would say, the best way to close bad schools is to open good schools. Because frankly, you could close a dozen voucher schools tomorrow, and those children are not going to end up in better schools. So, on the one hand, we're saying we want accountability and we want to close bad schools. I think we all agree with that. And at the very same time, we're restricting the growth of one of the highest performing schools in the city. Like, there's a profound disconnect on this particular point. So I think accountability is complicated, but I think on the voucher side, we support accountability when it's an intelligent apples-to-apples comparison of data.
One other question on the optimism, the wild optimism that you have.
Wild optimism, right.
For people who follow education closely, there was an interesting development this week. Didn't get a lot of press coverage, but it happened in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And Paul Vallis, who you referred to earlier, is a former superintendent in Philadelphia and Chicago, who was, as the story I saw, referred to him as a shining star of the education reform movement. 3 of the board members in Bridgeport who supported him lost their jobs in the election. He'll now face a board that's largely opposed to his reform efforts. And there are more than a few people who see that and see the outcome of the mayor's race in New York City as a message, and the message being that education reform, which had been ascending, has lost momentum, and that some of the things that you feel strongly about, you may have to defend very strongly in the days and months to come. What's your take on the current atmosphere surrounding education reform?
Well, I wasn't aware of that latest news. Clearly, there was the defeat of Michelle Rhee, who was a huge reformer, obviously, in D.C. So there are absolutely setbacks along the way, which you would expect, because there are some very systemic, historical, and powerful forces that I think are being challenged. So the news that you shared today and some of the stuff that's happened previously, I think is par for the course when you are challenging some practices and systems that have been in place for so long. On the flip side of what you mentioned is we're seeing voucher and tax credit laws spreading pretty dramatically throughout the nation, with other states, opening up these programs. Honestly, my focus is not zeroed in on Wisconsin, it's zeroed in on Milwaukee. This is my calling, and this is where I focus. And what I notice in Milwaukee is if you go back 18 years or 15 years, it is hard to find a really high-performing Central City school serving urban kids. And then Milwaukee College Prep came along and became the pace setter and showed what can be done and said this is possible. They're now at 4 campuses, or 3 campuses. And then you've got the Hope schools, who really are doing phenomenal work with an incoming student population that is very, very low performing, but seeing dramatic gains. You've got St. Marcus, you've got Bruce Guadalupe, you've got the Carmen schools. There is a groundswell of high-performing schools on the march in this city. And so, sort of regardless as to what's going on nationally, I find it really hard not to be optimistic, despite these crazy battles we're occasionally fighting. But there's definitely this movement towards more and more high-quality schools that are delivering at a really high level.
Let me take some audience questions, because I'm sure some of the folks in this room have questions they'd like to ask Superintendent Tyson. I'm going to begin right in the middle of the room. Hi, Barb. How are you?
I love what you're doing. I'd like to see what stands. I do have some questions. I'll just ask one now. You referred to keeping students until 8:30 p.m., which sounds like a wonderfully safe and productive use of your time and theirs. There have been efforts previously to create a residential school for kids in Milwaukee. Do you have any anticipation that you might go in that direction?
A residential school, being a
seed school,
the seed school kind of concept. Being a child of 10 years in a British boarding school, I love it. And in fact, when I got here, I was a huge advocate, and I'm still definitely open to the concept, especially if it was a partnership amongst schools, so you could identify the children within those schools who really need what we provide in our evening program. I've cooled a little bit on the concept, really for one reason. That what we've learned at St. Marcus is the critical hours are really between 4 and 9, right? Most children can get home, most, not all, and at least find somewhere in the house to sleep through the night. And it's that sleeping through the night that is phenomenally expensive. So I've sort of moved a little bit and really advocate for the bottom 10% in any school building. Can we find a way to feed them well and have them do their homework and then get them home around 8:30? But I'm not opposed to it. I really kind of like it, actually. I just see a substantive financial problem with scalability.
Let me take other questions. I'll go right up here. And I'm remiss, I know Ryan would want me to do this. If you're in the seating bowl, can you just press down on the rim? You probably know how to do this, so go ahead.
Okay, so right now, your school is really interesting because it's doing a good job of helping low-income students succeed in school. Do you believe that the work you're currently doing is actually helping to make your school kind of uninteresting, such that low-income students would be able to perform at high levels, across the board in the future? And do you believe that your expansion would help this happen faster?
Can you clarify?
Well, at this point, like, your school is doing a good job of helping low-income students to do well in school. And it makes you really interesting to people. People want to listen to you and hear you talk, and that's wonderful. But I would hope that in the future, low-income students doing well in school would be so, widespread that no one would think of it as an interesting thing. Do you think that the work you're doing helps, raise maybe future educators, future administrators, future government workers who could assist in making something like what you're doing uninteresting?
Oh, I long to be boring and uninteresting. Like what a gift that will be when, I love it when suddenly there's somebody hot on our heels, Atonement Lutheran School in the last 2 years has gone from about the middle of the pack in the voucher movement to in the top 10. On the WKCE, they beat us in 2 of the 5 subject areas. And it was like, hallelujah. Like there's another school with 300 kids or 250 or whatever they serve who are getting a really high level of education. So I think that's where we've got to get to, where the norm becomes what a bunch of schools are doing now that's having great results.
You'd be glad to be unremarkable for your
Very
success.
much so. I hope to retire totally unremarkable. That's my new goal. Thank you.
I'll get to as many as I can. Daniel, go ahead.
My question is, has either you or third party made an open records request of MPS regarding the Malcolm X school? And if you have, what have you learned? If you haven't done it yet,
yeah, a third party did, and a report came out by the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. It revealed all kinds of stuff, but most critically made it really clear that within the time frame that they allegedly had other plans for that building, they were aggressively trying to sell it. They showed the school to 5 or 6 other school operators, and nobody would take it, frankly, because it's too big. Who knows what's going on inside that entity? What is clear is Malcolm X is not about a community center. It's about market share. I believe that's what it seems to be.
What's your understanding of where that is right now? I mean, they're having legal counsel at MPS look at this, aren't they? I mean, this exactly what's taking place with Malcolm X?
Yeah, I think it's in limbo is where it's at. I think we're waiting for, we're not waiting, I'm sorry. We are actively, aggressively working with our friends to bring pressure to the mayor and to others to act on this issue and do what is right by the kids of the city. We're not going to go away. We will open another campus. Lord willing, we're going to push for it like crazy, and we continue to believe that Malcolm X is the right spot.
Let me take other questions. Let me go right here. Yes, ma'am.
Market share is really a fight about the money. Who's getting the money for educating the kids? How does St. Marcus finance the education for the kids? How much of your expenses are paid through vouchers? How much through private tuition? And where do you get the rest of the money? Because keeping kids till 8:30 has to be expensive. You're keeping educators there.
Yeah, it's a great question. So part of the answer to that, though, is that when you're creative, you can actually massively reduce costs. So, for example, Saturday school, which goes from 9 to 12 on a Saturday morning, costs us about $1,000 for a Saturday, or about $30,000 a year. And yet what you really get for that $30,000, that's about one position, is a 6th day of the week for your 100 neediest kids. Because your lights are on, everything is paid except the $100 you give each teacher for 3 hours work. So, and that's similar with the evening. In the evening hours, we have one gentleman who, Sean Spruer, runs the College Prep Center. And then he has about 15 alumni, high-performing alumni in high school or college who are looking for work, who want to give back, who want to get engaged. So even that program is phenomenally cost-effective. So we actually have been able to keep our costs. Our costs are now about $7,800 per child. That's everything. Saturday school, summer school, food, facilities, everything. And yet the voucher amount is still at below the level it was in 2006. And that's $6,500. So we have about a $1,300 per student gap. And good people in the community, foundations, individuals, choose to support one particular child or 3 children. And that's how we cover the gap. There is going to be a substantial voucher increase next year as a result of the state budget, and that will reduce the amount of money we need to raise per child, but only fractionally.
Other questions? I'll go right here. Yeah.
Describe the process, how you hire staff, how you evaluate them, and how you train them.
Yeah, so staff hiring, obviously a critical issue. We work really, really hard to know the staff before they come on board as a lead teacher. So we have lots of student teachers. We have students participate heavily in our summer school program so we can see the teachers before they come in. We have students who do state internships, so they serve for a year as like a student teacher. And then educational assistants. We have probably 5 or 6 lead teachers right now who started as educational assistants. Right now we have, this is thrilling to me, 3 alumni. We actually have 4 alumni on staff. 3 of them were students when I arrived, 2 of them in the 5th grade and 1 in the 7th grade. They are all in schools of education working towards their degrees and will be absolutely phenomenal teachers.
How much burnout do you have with your teachers? Because you're talking about a very intense, lengthy day. That's a challenge in some schools.
It is. Yeah.
How is it for you?
You know, I think part of the effectiveness of St. Marcus is that all of the workers, whatever they do, are deeply mission-driven. And it's a call to follow Christ, to sacrifice, and to serve. That's what it is. And that mission, that intensity of mission, also keeps our people centered and focused in a way that's where their strength and that's where they get rejuvenated and are able to keep going. So the quick answer is almost none. Of the people who have moved on in the last decade, by far the biggest reason has been pregnancy. And then second to that, leadership. We've had a whole number of people go into school leadership around the nation. Those are really the 2 big issues, and then maybe 2 burnouts.
Okay. Let's take other questions. I'll go back here, and then I'll come down here. Yeah, go ahead.
Impacts your relationship with St. Marcus and the community?
Phenomenally with the 7 children who live on my block. I don't get much peace and quiet, but yeah, you know, a lot of our staff live in the immediate vicinity. Our 5th and 6th grade teachers just married each other, and they bought a house like a block north. We have a pastor, 2 pastors within 3 blocks. And I mean, I think it's critical that the reality is that the people who we serve are living, many of them, not all, under incredibly challenging circumstances. And to say, I'm willing to live with you and by you in your difficult circumstances and share in that struggle, I think speaks volumes. And time and again has helped build relationships of trust that you have to use if you're going to ask people, which we don't with some of our parents walk in the door set to go with really high standards, but many parents, we're asking them to stop operating right here and start operating right here. And that requires trust.
Other questions? Yes.
So I live in the neighborhood as well. And one of the problems I have with Carver School and Golda Meir when I'm walking the dog, the kids or whatever, is at Carver alone, sometimes I've seen 22 buses pull up to take the kids all over Milwaukee, and the same at Golda Meir. Do you think Milwaukee Public Schools should do more to require children within the neighborhood to attend the school that's closest to the neighborhood to strengthen our neighborhoods?
You know what? I'm so unfamiliar with MPS's rationale for doing that I'm hesitant to comment on what they should do to resolve the massive busing that's going on. I will tell you this, though, that the real answer to that problem is to provide a high-quality school in every neighborhood. Because as soon as we do that, the vast fortunes and the massive behavioral problems that are created by busing, I mean, people think money is the biggest problem with busing. It's not. Take a look inside the window of a yellow bus as it drives past, and all the work you do up until 3 o'clock is destroyed between 3 and 3:45 on that bus. There are some great bus drivers and great operators, but for the most part, it's a problem. So for that reason alone, we have to provide a high-quality school in every neighborhood and reduce busing.
Yes, sir.
I'm interested in your curriculum And I wonder if you could evaluate or illustrate to us how you're satisfying requirements for art, music, and physical education.
Sure. It's fundamentally important to us. We have 1.5 music teachers, 1.5 FTE, and then a full-time art teacher and a half-time physical education teacher. So all students in 4th grade and below get all 3 of those subject areas over the course of the week, a total of 5 specials over the course of the week. You know, in the middle school, we don't provide anywhere near as much, but actually the reason for that is less to do with can we afford the instructors. It's the amount of work we need to get done in the school day to get students to the point where they are at or above grade level. That's partly because we've admitted so many middle schoolers who have come in below in the last few years. But children have to have that, and if you visit St. Marcus, you will be thrilled to see what students get in that regard. All of our middle schoolers, 3 days a week, get to choose an elective, and that elective could be drumline, junior choir, art, Renaissance, accelerated math and reading, a whole variety of sort of co-curriculars.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Yes?
Are the students required to take religious education, or can they opt out?
Legally, they can opt out. It's happened once in 12 years.
Okay.
Could you talk just a little bit about your philosophy about kind of along the lines of that question when you're serving a largely, I would imagine, non-Wells Lutheran population?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're really clearly and obviously a Christian school. I think that's why we haven't had many opt-outs, because when you come in and look around, it's like, if you didn't love Jesus, it might not be a very good choice. But you have lots of other choices. I mean, that's just reality. That's what we've set up, is we've given parents the opportunity to choose what they want. And we absolutely celebrate. We have some churches like Ephesians Baptist. It's just a phenomenal church. And so we celebrate that and you know, have good working relationships with those other churches. So we've just not encountered opt-out as an issue other than that one occasion.
I'm going to, yes.
Hi. Yeah. Love your school.
By what we've seen when we've been able to visit your school and when you've been to ours. As you're reaching out into the Milwaukee community, and it strikes me we serve obviously very different populations, but best practices are best practices. Do you see any opportunity for schools like ours to partner and work together?
Oh, absolutely. You know, interestingly, I think that one of the things that I think is about to happen in Milwaukee, up until this point, we have had a broken pipeline between K and 8th grade. We didn't have anywhere near enough prepared 9th graders to enter the high schools. What I'm seeing now, just from our graduates, and we've historically graduated 30 a year, this year we'll graduate 60, is now the problem is there are so many, well, maybe that's an exaggeration, there are enough K through 8 schools graduating kids at a really high level that there aren't enough high-quality 9th grade seats. And part of the reason for that was because the dollar amount for the voucher at the high school level was kept so low. It's been $6,500. You can't educate a high schooler for anything like that. We've had a restriction in the number of high-performing high school seats that are available. So one of the reasons why we've obviously been reaching out to you and to many other high schools in the area that maybe previously we wouldn't have looked at is there aren't enough high-performing high school seats in the city. And, you know, we all know one of the other issues that our city faces is the issue of we are a highly segregated city. In my view, the more that we can get your students, and some of them do this even now, they come down on Saturdays and they tutor our kids. What a win for your kids, right? And then the more that we can be taking some students in the city who are ready and prepared to thrive at the university school or Brookfield Academy, we better start doing that, because we've got to start bridging this race issue that our city struggles with.
1 second. Has St. Marcus ever considered opening a high school?
We have been asked endlessly to open a high school. We have not, and partly because we've seen other people try and do it, and it's incredibly difficult. But secondly, we believe we probably need to have about 180 graduates a year before we would try to do that. And ultimately, the conversation about a new high-performing Central City high school has started. I think that's ultimately where it could well end up.
You got a way to go. I mean, you said you've got
We're
60
not ready.
right now. You're graduating, you need 180. Yeah, go ahead.
What parts of your education model are applicable in non-religious schools, or is there applicability?
That's a good question.
It's a great question. There's massive applicability, and you just need to look at Milwaukee College Prep or Bruce Guadalupe. You know, we learned most of what we do from those schools, Milwaukee College Prep in particular. It works. You look at their results, and that you can't question them. You look at the two campuses they just opened, and it's absolutely phenomenal what they're doing. And it's one of both the great hopes and one of the great tragedies in our city right now, is that whereas 15, 18 years ago, there was nothing to look at. You had to go out to New York or to Houston to find something. We now have it in a whole bunch of schools in our city. But for some reason, we're not saying, oh, that works, let's go do it. And we're at least not doing that quickly enough. And that's why I'm so hopeful with Schools That Can Milwaukee, because that's in essence what they do, is they draw schools alongside the high-performing schools, share the knowledge, and we all have an open door policy. Here's what we do, here's how we do it. How can we do more of it?
Take a couple of final questions, and I'm going to get to other folks. Some people have lots of questions. I see somebody way in the back. Absolutely. Can you hang on one second? We'll get a microphone for you.
My name is Melinda Scrady, and I represent Pius High School here in the city of Milwaukee, and know Henry as a colleague in field. And I just want to applaud the work of all the educators in the room, the Catholic schools. I know Henry was thinking about them too, Nativity and other schools that are just doing just out of the ballpark work. In particular, I want to bring up one point about the partnerships that he's describing. We are now being much more aware, and it never happened before, just like he said, much more aware of being partners with the feeder schools and with the partners in the city who have children who are graduating and saying, but there's not going to be enough high school seats. Toward that end, I'm really grateful to legislators and educators here in the room for really working hard so that we could get the voucher amount up so that we can open up those seats. Pius did that too. But I really wanted to say that we're in an unfortunate and fortunate blessing right now. We're looking to submit a grant to a company, to a foundation, and they asked us to look at a very specific block area between 20th and 35th and Burleigh and North Avenue to seek a continuum of care for children who are underperforming who would then get some type of response from this organizational grant. And the good news is, bad news for Pius, but the good news is all of those children who came from the schools that Henry's describing have such high grade points and so little academic need that we are not sure if we can angle the grant ask. And that is really good news. We're going to look harder at what we can do to provide a continuum of care, but I applaud the work that you're doing and really appreciate that you've come to this platform today.
And if I could just accept the challenge there on I maybe was mentioning too many Lutheran schools. You know what? Catholic East, unbelievable work recently. St. Anthony's, largest Catholic school in the nation here in Milwaukee. Notre Dame Middle School. There are so many schools really beginning to move, and there are others in the room that I haven't mentioned. I apologize, but boy, it's an exciting time.
All right, maybe one more question, and there's someone who hasn't been called on yet. Go ahead.
My question is about how you're engaging parents. So a lot of the kids are coming to your school, but their families obviously are in need of help as well. Do you have an active parent group, or what are you doing to help the families?
Yeah.
Can you repeat that question for folks?
Yeah, sure. The question was, how are we engaging parents? Interestingly, we started out with really huge expectations of parents, which because most of them are single parents who have jobs and are overwhelmed, they couldn't fulfill. So we changed our requirements and adopted a philosophy that has very minimal parent expectations that we enforce 100%. And if I can just segue just a little bit, a critical issue we haven't talked about is parent accountability. One of the reasons why we're able to be so successful, and some of my friends who run Milwaukee public schools are pulling their hair out, is because there is so little parent accountability tolerated. And we, frankly, have a really, really high level of parent accountability. If you are repeatedly tardy, if you don't come to parent-teacher conferences, if you're absent unnecessarily, parents suffer. like, we hold them accountable. We don't remove the child, but we hold the parent accountable. And sometimes that means the child suffers. And some people are going to jump out of their seats at this, but sometimes a 7-year-old needs to suffer because their parent is not doing what they need to do. But what we've seen happen is remarkable. We have seen family after family and parent after parent change their behavior because they've started to see what other parents are doing and how they're doing it right. And they've been embraced by our staff, who it's an open door policy. Parents are in the building and they're invited to events all the time. But I think that there's parent engagement and there's parent accountability. And I think the issue in our city is that we have somehow let too many parents off the hook. And we refuse to hold parents accountable. And I think we need to do better at that. And it's a critical piece to making our schools better. But we have a ministry team, a group of people who their whole job is to reach out to parents and meet parents' needs and partner with parents. You know, when they can't get it right or the car breaks down or whatever it may be, we work really aggressively to meet those needs and to let parents know that they are part of a broader community, that we're not just about educating kids. We're about helping families become functional within the context of a school and church community.
We're going to wrap things up there. I did want to just to let you know, the folks who are in this room today, that our next event is it's the 24th. I think that's, is that a Wednesday? Tuesday, help me. Yeah, it's the 24th. I do know that. And it'll be with Rocky Marcoux, who is running the Department of City Development for the city of Milwaukee. There's certainly a lot to talk about. Some issues that are related to what we've been talking about today. Having said that, I wanted to thank everybody in the room for their attendance today and their rapt attention, and thank our guest, Superintendent Henry Tyson. Thank you. Thank you.